master plan. There are no other agenda items that will be heard tonight. This is a project of great importance that has continued to evolve over the past several years due to the participation from many residents and community professionals. We also feel it is a critical project that will help preserve a special park for many future generations to enjoy. The Park Board recognizes the complexity of the project that includes finding the right balance between rehabilitation of the park while enhancing the special passive park to meet the recreation needs of the community. As always, the Parks and Recreation Board welcomes the opportunity to work together with all of you, the Forest Park Project Board, residents, neighbors, and other interested parties to continue the tradition of providing a transparent and open review process that allows community members to work together to preserve and enhance unique properties that make Lake Forest such a special place. To achieve that goal, after a presentation by the petitioner and after initial Park Board members, questions and comments, we will invite the public to comment as well, and hopefully some accolades on the progress that have been made to date. A copy of the agenda, like I said before, is available in the back for anybody who just walked in. There are agendas by the back door. Tonight, we have an extensive presentation that will cover multiple aspects of the proposed master plan. The Parks and Recreation Board and the Forest Park Project Board recognize that there is still work to be done in several areas, but participation tonight will continue the process of soliciting feedback on the further refined concepts so the final master plan document may be prepared. Again, no final report, action, or master plan is being approved this evening. And I did want to say before we get started, when we do move to public comment, it will be a maximum of 5 minutes for anybody to speak. So if you have a big presentation or if you want to keep chatting, please, as you're listening through the presentations, try to cut it down. We will cut you off after 5 minutes because we do have quite a full audience and we want to keep the process moving tonight. So without any further ado, I invite Ralph Gesualdo and Steve Stimson to begin their presentation. Stimson.
Good evening. My name is Ralph Gesualdo. I'm a 40-year Lake Forest resident and a former Lake Forest Park and Rec Board member and chair.
And chairman.
Currently, I'm the president of the Forest Park Project Board. Thank you, Chairperson Ford and board members, for letting us come before you tonight. Let's see if I can. For over the last 15 months, our Lake Forest Park Project Board has worked diligently to research the history of Forest Park and to explore ways to protect and strengthen this unique and significant landscape. Our committee spent countless hours investigating key issues and preparing a detailed interim report to help guide our process. These committees brought forth preliminary findings and suggestions to help us better understand the historic significance of Forest Park and create an appropriate recommendations to our landscape architect, Stephen Stimson. Throughout this process, board members remain committed to following established standards of excellence in the areas of conservation, horticulture design, engineering, historic preservation, and cultural legacy. In addition, we solicited extensive input from local residents, city officials, subject matter experts, in order to ensure that all relevant information was entered into the record. Unfortunately, a few residents have questioned the openness of our process. However, I cannot think of another civic project in Lake Forest that I've been involved with or seen which has received so much public attention and so much public consideration. While I appreciate that not everyone will agree with every recommendation we make, no one can deny that their opinion hasn't been heard. Specifically, we conducted visioning sessions with local residents. Do we have that on here? I don't have that. I'm good. I can just speak. We had visioning sessions with local residents, participated in local ward meetings to discuss our progress, created a website to provide information, and solicited public feedback. Published all committee interim reports, hosted at least 2 public meetings regarding the Forest Park project, and regularly appeared before the HBC and the Park and Rec Board in the past. Taken together, this public process helped shape the recommendations that we made to our architect, Stephen Stimson, and resulted in the proposed solution we present today. I think it's important to understand that during this process, we listened to the residents of Lake Forest. We brought in resident experts around Lake Forest and Lake Bluff in our community. And from those experts and from those meetings and from those public process that we had, we gave direction to Stephen. And Stephen has taken that direction and come up with a plan today that I think you'll find is different from the original plan that was presented, over 15 months ago. So it's through this public process that changes have been made. We've listened to the residents, heard from the residents, and we think today we're going to present to you a park that is really, formatted by the residents of Lake Forest. And with that, I'd like to present Stephen to do his presentation.
Thank you, Ralph. Forest Park is a nationally recognized park. It's one of the earliest parks of the 19th century park movement. It's enjoyed by the residents of your city and visitors from the region. It is a iconic park in its location on the lake. In the year of 1857, when Lake Forest had commissioned Elmer Hotchkiss to develop a city plan, this land was set aside as a park. It's a pivotal piece on the lake that integrates or engages with two ravines on the north and south. It's about 3,200 linear feet of lake frontage. It's 12 acres, roughly. In 1896, there was a plat of land created in this drawing by O.C. Simons, who was commissioned by the city, which shows a road through that park. It acknowledges the existing vegetation that was in that park. It may be also suggesting some proposed planting that we cannot see today, but O.C. Simons was a very important figure in the history of landscape architecture, and his work influenced Jensen. They were contemporaries, and they both were key figures, particularly in the Midwest, in the development of parks. This slide is a early 1900s survey that shows, I think it's 1911, and that shows the road as surveyed that was built, which is similar to what Simons laid out. There are some differences, but there's no south access to the beach, although you can see the plan for sewage treatment occurring. There is a dead end road at the north end down to the beach. And today, in this overlay, you can see in gray how that has changed. This is a 2008 survey, I believe. You can see the additional parking, obviously, down at the beach. You can see the additional parking in the center of the park, which was put in decades ago as a temporary parking while construction was being done below. It was never taken out. There's about 20 cars there. There's a parking lot at the south end, which is a pretty wide, open, expansive pavement. At the south end, about 42 cars are accommodated. In our plan, and with a lot of input, and you may recall when I stood here a couple of years ago, I was lobbying to remove the car from the park, but I've since, through the process of design refinement and public input, have shown you a plan that actually maintains that car access in the park, but takes the parking out of the center, or the heart of the park. In fact, we are proposing to realign the south end of that entrance in the spirit of the naturalistic and curvilinear forms that you see in the work of Simons and Jensen, this prairie school style of landscape architecture. The other, and I want to point out that the road, and it's not reading too well at this scale, and I apologize, but we vary in width from 16 feet primarily through its length and 22 feet wide in a zone at the center of the park where we have drop-off to the beach access. At the southern end, we're proposing to reconfigure that parking. We're actually reducing some parking, creating some planted islands, doing some stormwater treatment there, and providing for buses that could actually move into that lot, circulate around, and move back out onto Lake Road safely. We're also providing 2 handicap spaces. This is the plan we showed in 2010. I don't want to dwell on it, but simply point out at that point we were showing, circulation of walkways with parking at the southern end. But I do want to jump to the importance of the circulation for the pedestrian. We have been looking at this very closely and fully embrace and appreciate how occupying that bluff edge is a very important experience in the use of the park. And this plan shows the realigned road where we're pulling parking out. There is a slight shift in that road to the west. It varies from 6 feet to 15 feet, plus or minus. What it allows is for the expansion of some space between the road and the top of the bluff for a walkway and some planting and sitting. We also have several other paths here I want to point out. There's a realignment of the path that comes from Deerpath, which currently kind of shoots off at a diagonal with an awkward connection across to the Belvedere. We've realigned that with a curve, but having it terminate where it really needs to functionally terminate. We've also suggested a path out to the northern tip. That would be a tertiary path. You can see by the size of the paths, the primary path is along the bluff, which runs north-south. That ranges from 9 feet to 15. These secondary paths and tertiary paths are about 7 feet. We are proposing a granular path, and I'll get into materials in a minute, but also along the west edge. We've noticed over the course of the design of the project and through talking to residences, there are a lot of people that end up walking in the road. And given the width of the park and the opportunities, I think, presented or to be created for the public to include a very gently meandering gravel path along that western edge, we think makes a lot of sense. We studied several options. I'll show you another one in a minute. But on materials, you can see on the left side, this is a compacted granular surface. We'd like to not use asphalt. I think that this is a park that has a historic significance. There's a lot of visual benefits and environmental benefits to granular surfaces. So we're proposing a very densely compacted, stabilized granular walkway for those walkways and paths. We're proposing these irregular shape local limestone slabs for things like landings at the top of the Belvedere and the bus and parking connection to the south boardwalk. And we're also proposing some new pavements in the parking to the south, which would include some permeability beneath the cars. We're also suggesting that for the roadway that still meanders through the park, that we do an asphalt base with a bituminous a layer and then a chip seal, so you have a granular appearance to that surface. This is another option we looked at, which explored a loop path at the north end and a loop path at the south end. We felt very excited about this opportunity to explore this woodland. This woodland is a very unique upland oak and maple hickory forest. We think right now there really isn't the ability to explore it. We felt also there's a great opportunity to move through the park and have a loop walk experience, but this seemed to fall short. And we went back to the plan which actually connects that trail along that west side of the park. The other elements I want to just point out, I think you probably are familiar with them, but we have some seating at the north end. We're calling that the north overlook. There's some seating at the south end, calling that the south overlook. The central space right in the heart of the park, I'll show you in a little more detail in a few minutes. Obviously have this big open beautiful tableland, but we have some suggestions on tree canopy amendments there I want to talk about. The widening of the roadway I discussed earlier occurs at this Belvedere, and I have a detail for that. The loop drive we've mentioned. At the south end, there's the beginnings of some restoration down there that I think is successful. We'd like to expand upon that and really have our walkway along the bluff essentially cross the road and engage the southern tip so that we really can experience South Ravine and North Ravine in this park. I think currently that park feels like you're really bound by the roadway, and so expanding those gravel walkways to make those connections, I think would really expand your experience of the park. And at the south end, I mentioned the parking and bus drop-off. This is a detail enlargement of the Belvedere area. Currently, there is a path that is shown here in a dotted line. The dashed line in here is the parking that comes out. The dashed line here, which is a little hard to see, is the existing roadway where you can see we're nudging that back to make room for a planted median and the gravel path that would be a safe distance from that roadway and allow you to sit on a bench, put your back against the bench and have plants behind you and feel like you can experience the lake without a car really feeling like it's on top of you. You can see that there's a fairly generous landing here, 22 by 28 of stone. We would incorporate bike racks, benches, trash receptacles, and drinking fountain. The next series of images are before and after sketches. So this is just south of that drop-off. You can see the overlook, existing overlook area. And the next image is what that might look like with a narrow roadway. And again, we go from a 24-ish wide road to something like 16. And as we approach further down, you'll see where it'll get a little bit wider, separating it with native planting, keeping that planting waist high or lower so we're not going to impact views to the lake, but we're going to give you a backdrop to site those benches and to shape or define that walkway. You can see on the right the walkway with benches along here in this whole pedestrian zone that results. You also can see this native planting, which we're trying to pull a little bit of that across into the park. I mean, currently you've got lawn from edge to edge, and historically, you would have seen more native plants on that tableland. We recognize lawn is important to recreation, but I think there's an opportunity to bring some of that native plant material up over the edge, help stabilize the bluff, and create a more interesting ecology to experience along that bluff walk. Moving north on that ring road a little bit further, close to the drop-off area, you can see another after sketch of how that terrace of stone might look, crosswalk, places to sit. You can see bike racks in the distance, still maintaining some benches in the heart of the park, and that low-level planting that we talked about. And moving further north, this is one pinch point where we have a significant tree, although we've been looking at this closely with Chuck Myers, city forester. There is quite a bit of damage to the base of the tree. It has some head and crown damage. And it's probably the largest tree that would need to come down in this road shift. It is in very poor shape, and you can see it's actually at a pinch point where we're about 6 feet to the bluff. So that's a little bit of a shift there. There are some existing trees to build upon. We think that long-term that tree in decline will not be missed, and we can maintain this concept of that walkway and low native planting to the north tip. On the western edge of the park, just that view of the expanse of lawn. I also want to show, I'm going to show you a path in a minute, but I want to point out how low some of this planting. We've had a lot of trees added, mostly since the 70s, trees that have been donated and planted throughout, some ornamental trees that have really, in some cases, I think, plugged up the views of the park. And so we have some thoughts on how that might be handled.
Is that north or south?
We're looking south.
Okay, because it says north, but
Yeah.
I think that's just a, yeah.
Yeah, I apologize. That is looking south. So the next view is you can see that winding gravel path on the left, and you can see also lifting up very carefully of that canopy through pruning. Site drainage is another consideration we're looking at. Bleck Environmental Engineering has looked at this conceptually with us, the direction that we think we'd like to go, and you can see here the puddling that's primarily occurring on the edges of pavement, which has caused the erosion of that pavement. You also have a little bit of puddling in the tableland itself, that we would, in the road shift, build in a grade linear trench system along the shoulder of the road. So it would be just under the edge of the road. We wouldn't be injuring trees in that process. And we'd be essentially taking all the runoff from the bluff back to that drain. And any runoff that makes its way to the bluff from the tableland will be intercepted as well. So this is, at this point, a concept we're working with Bleck to refine. To the south, we have just some normal passive drainage that occurs through that wooded area. There's a pretty big asphalt pad out there at the southern end that we'd like to look at in a different way. There's currently a catch basin. We think there's a great opportunity there to filter that water and not have it all just run straight from the asphalt where you've got the oils and chemicals from vehicles. Where today it runs straight into a catch basin and into your sewer system. So I'll give you a little more detail in a little bit on that. I want to talk about the canopy and spatial definition of the park. Whether you're Jensen, O.C. Simons, or Frederick Law Olmsted, the power of space in park design is determined by the way you shape space with canopy and plant material. And one of the things that we've noticed about this park is that over time, based on looking at photographs and even an early Simon sketch, that there's been a loss of definition of some of the open spaces in that park. And so our canopy study here is looking at ways to restore that canopy and shape those spaces. This is not a radical change. It involves some transplanting, some removals, but quite a few trees to plant as well. And I just want to point out in this diagram what I mean by shaping those spaces. There's really these negative spaces, which would be essentially, think of them as voids, create those outdoor rooms. And you can see below, there's a great view of that from the south where we've got a wonderful elm tree. In the center of the park, you can see also another example of that, although there is a little bit of encroachment that's occurring with some of these trees. Some of them were planted because they're hiding parking that's in the center. There's some crabapple trees that you wouldn't normally want to put on a plant list for a park that would be celebrating the native plant heritage. And at the north end, there's also been just an encroachment of some smaller trees in that center space. A few photographs of those trees that we feel are candidates to be considered to either transplant or remove are here. At the left, you'll see the oak I was describing, which has steel edging and asphalt up against the trunk and damage. That's kind of an obvious one. There's a cluster of actually quite beautiful hawthorn, which is a great Midwestern native tree, but it's also mixed in with quite a few crab, half a dozen or so. And that is right in the heart of the park at that location. And that impacts this sense of creating a space, although we want to work around the hawthorn. This row, a straight row, which is a bit of an anomaly in this park, is a straight row of sugar maples planted right smack at that center. And we think there's a better way to provide some canopy over those benches without the straight row. And they're easy to transplant. They're in the 6 to 7 inch range. They probably haven't been in the ground for very long. So the way we've approached this, and we've been working with the city, is to look at the survey, and there is a recent survey that we're going to be able to update this document with that was just completed about a week ago. But this identifies trees in white that are candidates for removal. A number of those trees are, again, in decline, wrong species, damaged. Those that are in good shape and transplantable, we will move. And we can move trees up to 12-inch diameter, so and maybe larger if we need to. And those are shown in yellow. And I think anytime we transplant, we're going to be moving to the edges. So the net at this point, although it's not a final number, is roughly 38 to be removed, 15 to be transplanted. Of the 15, there's, or on the tree survey, either to be transplanted or removed, we have 7 memorial trees. And I'll talk to you in a minute about how we're going to handle that. The trees that we envision on this tableland would be a continuation of native heritage trees, these noble trees like the oak, hickory, a sugar maple, just to name a few. You can see in this plan the notion of sort of shaping that space, again shaping that space, and also filling in a few along the bluff edge where we have, I think, some holes, and I think the desire to create some shade on the backs of those benches, if you can picture being there in the afternoon with that west light.
Hey, Stephen, can I ask a question?
Sure.
I noticed in this diagram that you're not reflecting changes in the southernmost end, where that woodland area is. Is that pretty much staying as is, or what are your thoughts there?
We have not identified tree by tree what needs to happen in there. We're going to be a little, we need to spend a little more time in that forest before we can come up with a count. There are a few Norway maples in there. There's some buckthorn as an understory, so those are obvious removals. I have a slide coming up that'll have a statement about that area, but we haven't identified individual trees at this point there. And
Okay.
There's probably a few, not a lot. This is a recent survey by the city showing memorials. There are, I'm having trouble reading the slides, so I'm going to read it off of here. 42 memorials in the park. And I bet you didn't know there were that many. I didn't, and I've spent quite a bit of time out there. And they are in the form of trees, benches, rocks, planting areas, markers, fountains, and birdhouses. The goal, the long-term goal, is to reduce the proliferation of the memorials. I think that we want to devise a system where it's easier to manage, maintain, and catalog what's there without detracting from the natural beauty of the park. So the first thing that has to happen is a very complete database and inventory. And that process has started, but we need a lot more work there. The goal would be, as we, for instance, replace a bench or replace a tree, that each individual that has contributed through a donation that's identified on a plaque, if they can be located, contacted, and they have the option to either participate in the relocation, be consulted in the relocation of that tree or rock or bench. Maybe in the case where it's an exotic tree and we'd like to not have it in the park, they'd have the ability to have that tree in their backyard. In the case where there's a tree that's in very poor shape that we need to remove, we would plant a new tree and reposition that plaque. So that's the direction we're thinking of for the existing plaques on trees and probably benches. We have a new bench, some new bench concepts to share, and we think that these plaques are transferable. But for future donors and supporters of the park, we want to come up with a system that is more comprehensive in terms of putting their names in one location, probably down at the south end of the park, for instance, in some kind of a kiosk or stone tablet, and I can show you a sketch on that in a few minutes. The plant communities that exist on the park are identified on this diagram. There's 5, and it's what makes this park very rich and diverse. Just starting on the bluff edge, there's this treed bluff where we'd like to diversify that canopy. We'd like to make a few small openings in that canopy, take out things like Norway maples and invasive species. The areas that are shown in lighter color is what we're calling the successional bluff, that we would strategically maintain, remove some canopy trees to maintain those as more open areas and make sure that the ground plane is a native ground plane. The oak upland, which is to the south and to the north, we're actually proposing to expand it in the north over that ring road. Currently, it kind of peters out at the edge of that ring road, and we think it'd be a great idea to pull that over the ring road with some new canopy trees that are consistent with what you'd find in that oak, maple, hickory canopy. And the last is the ravine to the north and south, and we would be looking to restore a native, high-quality remnant ravine landscape there and remove invasives. Ultimately, we would develop a management plan for each of these landscape zones. The views in and from the park are an essential design element of the park. They create our connection to the lake. They're framed in many different ways. They're large, they're small. We've identified in this diagram, I think, 9 views along the edge. These are historic photographs that I think capture the concept and essence behind what we're trying to rehabilitate in terms of view sheds. One to the north, how you have great oblique views. This is both north and south, and where you can actually see the vegetation on the slope. 2, kind of in the heart of the park, this is a great example of how you have an open view, but you also have canopy over you. So you're not sitting in that hot sun with an open view. You're actually sitting under shade. So it frames the view up high, but opens it below. And the third is these connections or view sheds from Deerpath and Spring Lane, and also from some of the houses across the road, that they would be more strategic openings in that canopy. This on the left is a contemporary photograph of what the bluff could look like in some of these open areas. We do have some areas where the canopy is this light, but we don't have areas that have this nice native herbaceous layer. This is a photograph taken on a bluff and lake bluff. The center, we have at the heart of the park this wide open view. We really could use a little canopy above to help frame horizontally. And then to the right, you can see the Spring Lane sight line, which is completely blocked. I have two more images of views. This is looking at the Deerpath, and I have a before and after sketch of what that might look like if we limb up trees and remove a few trees. So that's an after view. You can see there's a realignment of that path, maintaining hawthorns, but doing a little bit of pruning. I'll go back, you can see how dense that is and how low the canopy on some of these maples along the path are. And then the next view, a little bit further south on Lake Road, at the heart of the park, you can see where the overlook area is. So there's that birdhouse for context. And that could look like that, where we still would maintain some trees. You also see this shrub layer that's relatively low, but creates that separation between car and path. Site lighting. There are some nice historic fixtures in the park, and we'd like to just maintain them for the most part. There would need to be some adjustment in locations along this road where we're shifting the road slightly. But they're nice historic lamps. You have them throughout the city. We're proposing that along the walkway that occurs from this ring road to the south lot, that 3 of them be removed. They could be relocated or reused somewhere else in the city. We think that because we're not on a roadway, that a low-level light, and these are just the beginnings of some studies of a light that could be some rustic stone at about waist high. There are currently a couple of these bollard lights in the park now, one at each stair, ramp, and ramp. They're a small fiberglass contemporary fixture. I think we would look to try to do something a little more rustic. But that low-level light would be focused to the east, so and sighted on the left or west side of the path, so we're not pushing the beam of light, which could come out of one of these posts. We're not pushing it across to neighbors, and try to be mindful of the light pollution issue. There's lots of benches throughout the park, many different kinds. There's 11 existing. We're proposing 18 benches, so we'd like to increase that. We'd like to increase that primarily along that bluff edge. We're proposing 4 permanent picnic tables, and we're also proposing some drinking fountains, trash receptacles, and bike racks. At the bluff, at the center of the park, and I'm just going to go back and just get you oriented, right at this location is one area where we actually have benches that layer around the walkway. And it's, in our minds, the sweet spot of the park. It's where you have the double bench here. And our view is, rather than have benches that are off-the-shelf benches, that we want to develop a seating strategy for the park and a furniture strategy that really feels of the park. It feels unique to this place. A little more natural, maybe a little more rustic, but also durable. And in this drawing, you see the cross-section from that park road to the bluff edge. The existing grade is shown in red dash. So we have an opportunity here where we have a roadway, we have new planting, and that ranges in depth from 5 to 20 feet, depending on where we are. We're showing a bench with a back, showing the walkway, and then there's a grade change from here to here of about 18 inches that exists. So what we're proposing is to notch in a stone bench that wouldn't have a back on it that you could sit on. So you'd have this 2-tiered seating that would start to create a social space there and also be protected from the roadway. The language of seating, we've begun to study here, would use a native stone, something from the region, probably a white oak, heavy wood that could be oiled or let it weather, something fairly rustic. Plaques could be incorporated into them. Wherever we have benches today that have backs on them, we would cite a new bench in that location that would have, and I should have pointed that out. I'm sorry, I missed that. It's a little hard to read, but we have a bench with a back, a bench with a back, a bench with a back, and a few down here. So we've mixed back benches and backless benches because we like the idea that you're not always looking at the back of a bench from the tableland, particularly when it's empty. So these low stone elements would blend in with the site. And this is an example of how that would be notched in and how that would be blended in with the grade. Also the picnic table, something a little more permanent compared to the pipe leg and wood movable structures. And we're not thinking a lot of them, but 3 or 4 nested at the north and south end to take advantage of those nice wooded spaces. These would be made out of slabs of rustic limestone. Likewise, that material could also offer as a armature for your donor list or partial donor list or future donor list. Maybe this happens at the southern end. And there are a couple of different ways we could look at this, but we're at the moment thinking it's in one location as opposed to perpetuating furnishings throughout. The bike racks also and trash receptacles would incorporate the use of stone, possibly. You can see here you can slide bins underneath something that has a stone top. You can slide a bike into something that has stone that's notched with a pipe rail. Now those would occur essentially at that seating or landing area and also at the southern end and several drinking fountains as well. At the southern parking, we have done some realignment, although really haven't increased the size of the parking. We've just, if you go out there today, it's, like I said, it's asphalt pretty much from here to there. There's a dash line here that goes diagonally here, and we're essentially on that footprint. We have, however, suggested that that island or that large parking area be broken up with a planting in the center. You could introduce, again, native trees. I think this is also an opportunity to let some of the water drain into a landscape buffer that then feeds into your storm sewer after it's filtered. There are a lot of different ways to do bioswales. It's not a deep ditch. It could be 12 inches deep over 20 feet, which is hardly perceptible. There would not necessarily be standing water, and it would ultimately drain out at the end. So we really see this as a green filter. It's the right thing to do in parking lot design today. I think it's an opportunity for the city to embrace that. I think you've obviously demonstrated the sustainable ethic in your town, and this is kind of for us a no-brainer. This is a before and after view of what that could look like. And I'm going to end on the master plan and leave this up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice work.
Thanks.
Okay, at this point in time, board questions and comments and thoughts about what we've just seen.
I think it's fantastic. Start out, great work. I know it's been a long process and a difficult process, but I really, really like what you've come up with. I love the walkway around the park and the perimeter. I think it's a great idea. I think it's from a safety perspective, from providing vistas that were never there before, from providing walkways that people don't have to use the road. I think that's fantastic. A couple questions on the surface of the road itself. You mentioned the chip seal, which I couldn't quite tell from the picture
Yeah.
how rough that surface is. Does that require special equipment for clearing in the winter?
Not necessarily, although if you were to use a rubber tip or nylon edged plow, you would do it a favor. The chip seal can be done a couple different ways. Some people like to leave the loose material on the top, so it really looks and feels like a gravel road, even though it's got the density and the firmness of a paved road, because it's paved underneath. I have done some roadways or driveways where that loose material is swept off, so it's not as susceptible to plows moving. Basically, the plow is going to move the loose material a little bit from side to side, and so there's a spring cleanup requirement if you have the loose granular material on top. It's not a lot of time, but it's a day for a few guys in a roadway this size. If you chose to sweep it and have it more manicured, then you wouldn't have the loose material moving on that surface.
We have one of those on the river.
Curt, can you, your microphone's not on, if you could just,
Sorry.
that's okay.
Do we have that equipment? I think you mentioned that we had the rubber.
We currently have 2 rubber plow tips, so it is possible. The challenge would be is that obviously it's not, can guarantee that we use that in a variety of places in the community for clearing snow, so the timing to get down there on a normal cycle would be different than what we do currently, so the plowing schedules and stuff would be delayed or could be different, or we'd have to buy a different piece of equipment to also put a blade on, which would be very expensive, so.
How does that material hold up to ice and things? Does that ice easier than, I mean, we've had a fantastic winter this time around, but usually we're not so lucky.
Yeah, I have not seen ice be a problem on this. Yeah, it's essentially asphalt underneath. The icing is a problem if you don't have proper pitches. Essentially, if we've got our cross pitch and the water can get off of it, whether it's gravel or asphalt or chip seal, that's really what's most critical to getting the water off, is the pitch on the surface.
What's on the edge of the road then?
We're not showing or anticipating a visible edge. We've done them with a flush steel edging before. We think we could probably just do this. It would just be a cut beveled asphalt edge that then would have the planting or the grass come up to it like a normal shoulder on a roadway. The walkways would be edged with a metal or stone edging to contain them, likely.
Okay.
Yeah, I really like the walkways as well, for a couple reasons. First, that I know a lot of, I hate to just say moms, but parents.
Wait and see.
Moms, we love the loop. We love to walk. If we're picking kids up or waiting for kids, we love to have a loop, and not having to be in the street is huge. Even on the bike paths here, you're always kind of looking behind you. Is a bike coming or something coming? Imagine walking with your kids in a stroller with the kids, with the driving, and the kids do come down there and, quickly pass through the ring road, and Lake Road is pretty fast too when they're zooming up from the beach and stuff. So I think it's a great safety, as well as the kids who work down there. I know there's been complaints when they have to keep track of the cars when there's overflow as far as parking goes. There are certain parts of the ring road that the parents are allowed to park in, and there's other places where they're not. And there's been confrontations with people saying, well, I don't care what you say, I can park here. So that's one less thing that our staff needs to worry about, as far as they're all going to be allowed to park on the ring road, and that we still have a path for everybody to walk on. So I think that helps our staff in the summers as well, and I think it's a great idea to keep those walkways there. I think it's a wonderful addition, especially since Lake Road does not have sidewalks right there. And another comment I have is about the materials for the benches and the lamps and the light posts and the trash receptacles. I think that ties great to what's downstairs at the beach park, as far as those the pavilions go. It really ties it all together and brings it, you know, it looks like it belongs with each other. I think it's really a great idea.
Question. Certainly, I think the plan is amazing and spectacular, and you know, in a million years, I could never come up with something like that. But as you design something, you obviously start with constraints. You've got the existing trees, you've got the existing landscape. One constraint that's always used in building something is financial. Was there a budget constraint?
Yeah, we've asked Stephen to start working on a budget for it, but, you know, one of the things that we've already engaged is we've started our fundraising efforts. You know, we understand that this is a private project, and this is gonna be funded with private funds, so we've already started to engage our fundraising efforts, and we've already started to raise money, to get us through this part of the plan, you know, the Stephen part of the plan. So we're still kind of working on those budget numbers, and a lot of it comes out. We hope to have more numbers as we get to our next meeting, but, you know, we're trying to gather some input now to understand exactly what, you know, what project costs are. So we're kind of in the early stages for that.
So then, is it fair to say, as the financial aspects get clearer, that will ultimately impact the design further?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we want to set a budget, and our goal in fundraising is to reach that number. And, you know, our fundraising people are confident they'll be able to get there. Now, I say that, and I'm getting a lot of stares from behind me.
No, I guess more the concern is, and I understand the goal, and I applaud the goal. You know, if this costs $1 and you can raise $1, if this costs $1 billion and you can raise $1 billion, the question is, if this costs a certain amount and you only get half of that or 3/4 of that, you know, then what happens to the design, and how does it get modified or constrained?
Well, I think one of the challenges that we'll have in the process is I think we will be able to do part of the park in stages. So we don't have to necessarily finish the entire park, you know, all up front. But if we have a master plan, I think there's a lot of parks in Lake Forest that a master plan was created, and then over time, that master plan was implemented. So this could be a project similar to that.
Can you give us a sense of what those phases might be? What's a logical sequence?
I think, haven't given it a lot of thought, but I think off the cuff here, we would want to have the road resolved, pull the parking out of the center of the park, get the road resolved, the basic infrastructure of drainage, lighting, parking to the south reconfigured. Planting is a big variable. You know, you could plant a 2-inch tree for $400 or $500. You could plant a 8 or 10-inch tree for thousands. So we could plant smaller trees. Planting could be phased. I think we would phase removals also. I think we would. One of the nice things about the park is that it's large enough, and the trees are arrayed more or less in a naturalistic way, so we could actually plant trees before we have to take all trees out. The trees we would need to move would be the ones that are in conflict with the road, naturally, but I think we could phase planting. There's quite a bit of variability on materials, like the stone work, number of benches, you know, those are donor opportunities too. The square foot prices on stone varies from stone to stone. Granular material also, there's some variability. So I think we could, if we needed to, we could look at some substitutions and still maintain the concept. But I think that phasing I described would be my initial feeling.
I want to jump in and applaud the work, Ralph, that your team has done. I mean, there's no question it's extensive, and I know we've had a lot of participation, and I think that's appropriate. I think that's the right thing, particularly around an amenity here in Lake Forest that is so beloved and so, you know, that's been around as long as it has. So, but it appeals, or it appears to me anyway, based on an involvement, kind of on a peripheral involvement that I've had for several years, that this plan is appropriately consistent with both historical intentions as well as with, you know, what we need, what our current community needs today. And I think there's a really nice balance that you all have struck there. I would echo what's been said about the bluff path in particular. I think that's a really important upgrade for the reasons that have been stated. I would also, for the record, say I believe there is no, in fact, I was there, so I know there is no sidewalk on the west side of Lake Road, and the path then becomes the only sidewalk along Lake Road, and I think that's important as we have people who, you know, need to navigate the park. It certainly doesn't preclude being in the park, not having a path, but having a path is really a nice thing, and particularly when we're taking the parking out of the north end of the park, which I personally am a little concerned about. But the fact that it's not there means you can't park your car there. So you got to have ways to get up into the park from the south end where the parking is. I will also just say I think the sight lines, the view sheds that are contemplated, I think are fabulous, and it's always been a complaint of mine in that park that you can't see the lake, particularly in the summertime, and or at least very well. There are only some, you know, limited areas where you can do that, and I think that's one of the, I mean, it's a treasure, and the community ought to be able to see the lake while preserving, obviously, the integrity of the bluff. So I applaud that. I think doing that in a way that's you know, that's going to work long term is important. I do have a line of questions around the width of the road that's contemplated, Steve. I heard you say the current road is 24 feet,
It varies, but it's probably 24 at a maximum.
and we're talking about a road that's about a third less wide than that.
For a bulk of its distance, we're talking about 16 feet wide. And in getting wide enough for a section at the overlook, it would be several hundred feet, where it would be 22 feet wide, which is more than enough for a vehicle to stop and pass. For those days when you want to allow parking along a ring road, we would imagine that to occur peak summer time when it's parking on grass is possible, and for that reason we are proposing a reinforced shoulder along that inside loop on the west side of the loop, so that grass would be reinforced with it's basically a broken rock and fiber material that's not visible, but it's under the grass, and it would make that suitable for people to park on.
And then we'd have staff there directing people to do that. And how many cars can be accommodated along there?
I think we calculated 70 along the road.
So you get almost back to where we are now in terms of capacity.
Yeah.
I think there's currently 55 spaces you can park along the road, and an additional 20 spaces that are in that center core parking. So I think when we eliminate the center core, I think we're up to 70 spaces that could be parked along the roadway, so it's more or less a wash.
But we're losing 21, is that correct?
We lose an overall 21 spaces with the south parking lot.
If we said we really didn't want to lose any parking overall, I know this has been discussed, I don't want to, but if we said we really didn't want to lose any parking, what would you guys propose? I mean, I know you've talked about it, I know you've thought about it, what would you do?
And I'll just, you know, in the planning stages, then I'll let Stephen answer that. One of the things that came up early in the process and was originally the proposal had a parking lot on the north end. And what we heard from residents, I think is, even when I was on this board, was that no parking on the north end of the park. They didn't want to see additional parking on the north end. When we talked about, you know, we talked to the city about, you know, bus drop-off and pickup that could take place up top. You know, the city told us, they gave us some numbers on what the actual use of that parking is, and the few days a year that actually the south parking lot is utilized at all. I think if we use the the parking down by the beach, and we coordinate parking at the beach, the south parking lot, and parking along the road on those peak days. You know, the city has kind of coached us along the way to say that there's plenty of parking there. You know, we were concerned with parking in the center core of the park. We didn't want to see that as a group. The residents that, and I got the accolade when you said thank you for the job you've done, but we have close to 50 volunteers that work on committees. And what we heard from those committees and what we heard when we reached out to the public is no parking, central core, no parking on the north end of the lot. And they didn't want to see an overexpansion of that south parking lot. In respect to the residents down there, and I think, Curt, you brought up an important point, that what's happening with that north end or the south end. And I think one of the things that we talked about is maintaining the integrity of what's there, the denseness of those woods, the special area, but adding the value of being able to walk through that area, we think is a real positive for the people that use the park.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with
So,
that.
we think that we are losing 21 spaces. You know, we struggled with losing 21 spaces, but we thought that it was more important to maintain the integrity of that south end, eliminate the central core parking, and work with the city on maybe using the underutilized parking down at the beach.
And you're the underutilized being on the south end where the
Down below.
sewage treatment is
All the way
down
down.
below. Yeah,
Correct.
yeah.
And we're only talking 3 days a year, basically, right, Mayor?
Yeah, and this past summer, we had 3 days of overflow capacity where every lot was filled and we parked along the ring road. So they weren't the vast majority of our days. We do track it between Memorial Day and Labor Day. So that's kind of, you know, instead of building for those extreme days, the concept more is to build for what the typical, you know, weekend use is down there, and we'll, you know, work and try to flex a little bit when we have those overflow days. The reality is, even on those days, we were overflowed this year, so, you know, folks had to drop off and then go park uptown, or, you know, come back down when they could find parking. So it's always a work in progress on those hot summer days to make it all work. I think the other aspect is just the lower south area. We've been hesitant to send cars down there if it was also a very busy boating day, because we also have a large boating crowd. And in this proposal here, we would allow that mixture to happen sooner throughout the day, maximizing at all hours the available parking that's on that lower level as well. So
I had a question. Last time, of course, there was a lot of discussion about the main stairs, and we haven't touched that. Is anything going to be done with those stairs, refurbishing them at all?
Yeah, our plan was to not to change the alignment, but to repair in place the stair.
Okay. First off, I commend you on the Herculean task you've done. I think what you've come up with and what you've been working with for the last couple of years is a great plan. I do have a soft spot for elderly and handicapped folks, and I'm very concerned that 2 handicap parking spaces are not enough. And you'd mentioned that there was a 22-foot width near those stairs, and then, of course, the limestone pad. Is there any way that we could incorporate handicap spots there? And again, for emergency vehicles or access and things like that?
I think physically it's possible. We would want to give that some more thought, if that was a requirement that we had to meet. You know, handicap could fit there, I think. I'm not sure it's the best solution, but if we're trying to pull cars out of there, but it may be a way to add a spot or two.
And then this is more just a question of interest. When it comes to the beach path being close to the bluff, is there a benchmark or, you know, an agricultural way of measuring how close that needs to be to keep it stable from the bluff? I might not be asking this question properly, but
We're going to make sure, and we have some good consultants to tell us how too close it is. You know, as a gauge, we know the current road gets as close as 6 or 7 feet at the north end, and we're told it's not a threat. I think the further back, the better on roadways, but we're probably within 5 feet. I think we said 5 was a minimum.
okay.
And we want to make sure when we're 5 feet back, there's enough vegetation that creates that visual boundary.
Great, thank you.
I just also wanted to chime in and say what a great job, Ralph, your committee has done, and Stephen, with this plan. I think you've really demonstrated sort of a faithfulness to the historical concepts without feeling kind of trapped in the sense of treating the park like some sort of museum, recognizing that it's a growing, evolving thing. And what we want to do is to try to create a plan, and I think you've succeeded, that will kind of maximize the beauty and usefulness of the park. I especially like the path Robin and others were talking about, I think going along the western side in particular, and I think that's actually going to make people use more of the park, get people into parts of the park where I think most people just stay on the ring road and they don't stray very far from it. So I think that's going to really enhance the park for us. And, just want to commend you. Tremendous job.
Any other comments or questions?
Nice work.
Great job. Thank you so much. At this point in time, we will open up the meeting to public comment. I'm gonna quickly read a couple rules that we will be following tonight, and I appreciate all of your help in keeping to these rules. The chairman will recognize a member of the audience who will come to the microphone at the podium, please, and state your name and address for the record. Each person will be limited to a maximum of 5 minutes to speak and may not come to the microphone a second time. And we will hold you to the 5 minutes we will be timing tonight. Public comment should not be redundant, and all comments should be directed to the board and not the audience. If the public has any letters or other written materials, they may be handed to the director for the public record. Everyone has a right within reason to be heard respectfully, so decorum will be maintained at all times. The chairman has the right to change his procedures if deemed in the best interest of the meeting. So, okay, are there any comments from the audience? Mr. Falcone.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Basil Falcone. Given the time constraints allowed each speaker, I will not reiterate the objectionable points my fellow residents have already or will articulate as these relate to the Forest Park project. I therefore intend to simply provide you with an overview of 4 points, which is a reiteration of about coming here before the board almost exactly 2 years ago. Forest Park is de facto an historical site, as records will indicate, and it's located in the East Lake Forest Historic Preservation District. Number 2, any changes, therefore, to such sites, landscape or otherwise, must comply with strict historical preservation restoration standards and ordinances. That clearly means no renovations, no enhancements, changes that would conflict with such ordinances. 3, currently, the present landscape architectural plans for Forest Park provided by the Stimson Group, although beautifully and professionally presented, represent substantial design deviations which would conflict with the historical and preservation standards and ordinances these relate to Forest Park. So we need to revisit this, readdress these issues, because a lot of what's been shown tonight really contemporizes this park in terms of a lot of what's accentuated as it relates to lamps that are very contemporary, benches, etc. So we need to work together to bring this to where it's been, and I'll use a simple analogy. If we were to address trying to change the Wrigley building from what it is historically to a contemporary building with specific features that conflict with the historical preservation, there would be a major problem in Chicago. Now, I ask you all to please pay attention in moving forward, working with our group, and I, as a representative of Friends of Forest Park, along with the Jim Levels and others who really stand by this preservation view of what the park should be. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you would like a copy, incidentally, and I'd be delighted to do so, furnish you with the criteria from the historic preservation ordinances which qualify the property for Lake Forest landmark designation. There are 10 points, which I've given to Ms. Arsdale 2 years ago. Okay? If you'd like a copy, I'd be delighted to send it to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes. Mr. Gannon.
My name is Sandy Gannon. I live at 650 Northmore, and I could go hoarse addressing all the issues that I think need to be addressed from this presentation, but it's good for all of us. There's a 5-minute limit. I think what we need to end up with is a comprehensive plan that involves both ravines, the beach, the bluff, and the tableland. This is a first step, but that's what we finally need before anything really should happen. We need a true master plan that takes into account the history of this park and the directions we best think will go in the future. That needs to be done before we start any construction. What we have at this point is a conceptual construction plan with some renderings and some plan views, some of which conflict with each other, but this is conceptual. These are not construction drawings. Unfortunately, we don't have any written documents to elaborate and explain some of these issues, and I think that's a shame. We did in the first go-around. Let me touch on a couple of points that I think will concern you. You have different issues than the HPC will. Commissioner Taylor, you mentioned economics. I think that's a big issue to be aware of. What we have now is a very undefined public-private joint venture with no real guidelines. We've heard all different things about how this will be paid for. Ralph was talking about a 501c3 and raising funds for it. Let's be very careful what gets approved, because the earlier numbers were several $1 million for this project. Whether that's the final numbers, who knows at this point. But we don't want to get halfway through this and find out that the private entity, whether it's individual donors or a 501c3, can't come up with the funds to complete it, and then guess who deals with the rest of it? The taxpayers, all the residents. So let's be very careful what gets approved and when construction starts on different elements of this. I'll touch on two issues, the stone wall seating and the road and path along the bluff. The stone seating, I think, is very inappropriate for this park. Stone slabs, geometric forms, all rectangular. O.C. Simons would never use those forms or those materials. That doesn't respect this unique topography. These are earthen bluffs from Winnetka up to over Chicago, essentially. They're very different than if you went up to Kenosha, you would have rocks right on the shoreline. This is unique terrain with the ravines, with the earthen bluffs, and here we impose in this naturalistic park these stone slabs to sit on. Makes no sense. It is not compatible with this site or this very unique area. We need to be aware of that and not just disregard For the road and the path, one of the issues I understand, particularly in favor of the city, is this is a safety issue to separate vehicular traffic and pedestrians. Well, how do you argue against safety? Well, maybe if it's a non-issue. We've had over a century of pedestrians, all sorts of vehicles. We haven't had an incident. That's got to count for something. And I think one of the main concerns I have is the steep slope ordinance. It's being totally disregarded here. Kathy Zerniak made a statement that the ordinance only applies to habitable structures. It clearly is not supported by the language in the ordinance. Structure is defined as anything constructed or erected, the use of which requires more or less a permanent location on the ground. That's a road. That's a path with any kind of foundation. Section 4615, steep slopes, is quite clear that applies equally to both public and private property, that no structure or building foundation be located within 75 feet of the bluff edge, and that all construction activity, grading, excavating, filling, terracing, tree removal, occur at least 50 feet from the bluff edge. Ken Magnus, the recently retired city engineer, made that quite clear in meetings, public meetings on this very topic in 2010. How does this get approved by the city staff? If this is approved, aren't we potentially opening the city to litigation? Let's not even open that door. Let's not go there.
Thank you. Romy?
Thank you, everybody. My name is Rami Lopad, and I live at 410 East Woodland Road. I've waited to see these plans for 2 years, and I wish I could stand here like you and tell you what a great set of ideas is embodied in these plans, but I can't. These drawings are emblematic of everything I've worried about regarding the development of a master plan for Forest Park, a master plan which is clearly needed. This is a concept, but without more thought and certainly more words, this is not a master plan in any sense. Bringing these drawings to the public tonight was more than premature. Last we left in November, you heard reports from engineers, landscapers, and historic preservationists. Those committees did not agree with each other. You and the HPC asked some questions but gave no clear direction. However, Mr. Stimson seems to have been told to follow the direction of the landscape subcommittee, which said that any motif he wanted to use in the park was fine. And so he did. Let me point out just a few sampling of problems. I only got this plan yesterday, so I did this very quickly. Let me point out just a few sampling of problems that I see after seeing the plan for a day. First slide, please. Parking in the main park. Residents like it. It's well used every day and all year long. What's wrong with having 8, 10, 15, 18 cars in the park? There's nothing there that's certainly regrading, and shrubbery and a good architect can't hide. 2 years ago, we heard that front-end parking cars were ugly clutter. Now the plan proposes letting cars parallel park. If it was clutter then, parallel parking is definitely worse for views across the park. I'd like to say that just yesterday, a woman who moved here from Virginia was in the park, and she told me she wouldn't like to see the central parking removed. She drives with her ailing husband, to your point, from Lake Forest Place. They park. He sits on what's known as Mr. Lovell's bench, where they can see each other while she walks the dog. She looked stricken when I said the parking will all be moved to the south end. I agree. The Parks Board needs to encourage, not disenfranchise, the public from using the park. I say, keep this park simple. Some parking should stay in the main park. Second problem, please. Yeah, a little hard to see. The second problem is the mixed metaphor of seating styles in all of our parks. The designer here proposes a new style for seating, lighting, water fountains, and so forth. Of course, rock walls have nothing to do with O.C. Simons, the 1896 landscape designer, but also we have now, by my count, 41 different types of benches in the park system. Next slide, please, and 5 styles in the park itself. Until the city's Historic Preservation Commission decides what style is appropriate, no further design work should be done. It's a waste of time and money. I say keep it simple. Park benches work. Just settle on one style. Next slide, please. Paths. A new 7 to 9 foot packed dirt jogging path is proposed along, that's Mr. Stimson on the right, that's the beach on the left. Next slide. A new 7 to 9 foot packed dirt jogging path is proposed along both the east and west sides of the park. These pictures show what the granular material that's proposed. These paths are not needed, they're financially ridiculous, but like many elements in the park, they are not thought out yet. For example, at the north end, why would you dump pedestrians into that very dangerous intersection? Do you know where I'm talking about? Between the 2 roads, one leading to the beach and one coming out of the park. Further south, why would you cut down a perfectly lovely horse chestnut tree to put in a sidewalk and move that sidewalk about 30 feet away from Lake Road? People will walk right across the grass to get onto Lake Road. Why do we need sidewalks on either side of Lake Road? Yes, there are sidewalks on either side of Lake Road except south of Deerpath. And is it safe for all buses, cars, and boats to meet at the south elbow in Lake Road as they exit the parking lot? I say, keep it simple. The road operates not just fine as a wide sidewalk, as the engineering subcommittee called it. Why fix what's not broken? No path. Next, this is not a natural landscape design. There's many ways to understand this plan's most glaring issue. One way is to read Ralph Gesualdo's recent letter to Friends of Forest Park that says, by default, it will look like O.C. Simons. It will also look like Jens Jensen. That's so sad to those of us who have studied this for 2 and 3 years. Beyond that insult, there's a telltale way to know that no one's leading this plan in 2 years. No one has studied up on Simons. On the top, you see the 2 hawthorn trees that Mr. Stimson referred to. Their branches go all the way down to the bottom of the ground. On the bottom, you'll see Mr. Stimson's plan. Those very same hawthorns are limbed up. And with all due respect, Mr. Stimson, your photoshops don't even show trees that are there today. You'll be taking down the ash tree.
That's over 5 minutes, I'm sorry. Thank you.
That's okay. Anybody want to hear more? I'd be glad to do so. And
Follow up with the meeting tomorrow night at Historic Preservation. You'll have some time to speak there as well.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Historic Preservation, if you'd like to follow up, or you can meet with people.
Well, these were
afterwards.
mostly park issues.
Okay. Yeah, we'd be happy
so I have
if you want to
plenty
pass
more.
it. Yeah. if you
And
wanna email it to
can
us.
you suggest a time when I might come back before the next meeting? When, should I meet with you somehow? Will there be a chance for the public to be
Sure,
heard?
if you want to talk to Mary, we can work out something.
That'd be great. Here's my questions for the park board. It's
Okay, if
about-
you want to hand them to Mary, that would be great. Thank you. Any other comments from the, yes?
Good evening. My name is Ingrid Brzezinski. I live at 941 East Westminster and have been a resident of Lake Forest for 16 years. I go to the bluff at least once or twice a day, having a dog that loves to be walked and loves to walk in the park. We sit on the lovely benches, we look at the beach, we look at the lake, and really enjoy it. Now, when I go there, and I go various times of the day, weekends, different seasons, I find that there really is not a lot of traffic. You know, in the summer, there may be some peak times, but I can usually walk with friends in the middle of the road without any fear of getting hit. Now, based on that, I really don't think we need the bluff walk. I think it is, if we really want to preserve the integrity of the bluff and the slope, that's something that perhaps we really don't need, and I would request to actually not move forward with that. I think that it is an additional expense that is not warranted and that the taxpayers would need to maintain.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Yes.
My name is Virginia Moore, and I live at 1260 Northwestern in Lake Forest. My husband has been a resident of this community for 77 years, and I have been a resident for 56. I am concerned you addressed it, and I hope I addressed it enough, as far as ADA, which was my profession. He's in a wheelchair. He can go on a walker on 1 foot, 1 step, and rest for 5 minutes. And what we have done is we have taken the car so they can go to the bench. And this reflects on the bench from the architect. Individuals who have disabilities need a back for a bench. The concrete will not work. It doesn't fit the site. I think you have answered most of the parking issues I had. I didn't realize there was going to be parking along the paths, and I'm glad for that. I'm a little concerned that, and people were at Crystal Point with the 6 buildings, are very concerned that you are limiting and losing 20 spots at the south parking. I think that, residents really use that park. As I say, I walk my dog, and I'm just like the last person. I want it to be very accessible to us. I'm interested about the cost. I'm worried about the replacement. I know if there are trees that shouldn't be there, or there's landscape that shouldn't be there, yes, they should be culled. But I don't want a new park. We want the park that we've had ever since some time we've been here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes. Just a minute, we have someone coming. You're next.
Robin, if we could just remind everybody to give us their address, too.
Yes, please give us your address.
Christine Sakara, and I live on Mayflower Road. And we've lived here for 40 years.
Would you mind putting there? Thank you so much.
We've lived here for 40 years, and we love the park. Forest Park is quiet, it's uncluttered, it's an unpretentious landscape. It's a setting for Lake Michigan that you can see now from Lake Road. You can see it from Deerpath and from Spring Lane, but not if you plant hedges along the bluff, along the ring road. You'll obscure the vision. The city just spent $80,000 of our taxpayers' money trying to prove that the ring road was causing erosion to the bluff. That was disputed by the city engineers, and now you want to put a path even closer to the bluff, and you want to cut away the bluff and put slabs of stone on the edge. Won't that cause more erosion? And why move the road at all? The engineer said that the road bed was solid and it only needs resurfacing. I and 1,000 others or more Lake Foresters want to see this forest park stay as it is, with the road resurfaced. It hasn't been surfaced for the last 20 years, so no wonder. All the heavy equipment for rehabbing the road that goes down to the boat ramp has parked there, and of course it's damaged the road, but that it could be resurfaced. It's a great place to walk through, to run through, to bicycle through, or just sit on those donated benches and see the lake. And Mr. Gesualdo was supposed to be the contact person regarding the plans for Forest Park, but he's been unavailable these past 2 years. He's not listed in the telephone books or on the city's websites, nor did the city, when I called to ask his telephone, they didn't even know his telephone number or his address. It seems that only the Garden Club has the right to any voice on Forest Park that matters. What about the other taxpayers? Thank you.
Could you state your name and address again?
Christine Sakara, 540 Mayflower.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
And how can you park if you narrow the road? How can you put additional parking on the road if you narrow it? How will the cars drive by? I don't see where there's any additional parking there if you narrow it. I think Forest Park is beautiful as it is. Let's not change it.
Thank you. Okay.
I'm Jim Lovell, and I live on Lake Road, about 500 feet away from the park. I've watched this park, and I've been in the park for about the last 12 years. And we have to really look at what this park is used for. In the wintertime, it's used for joggers, people walking dogs, some bicycle people coming around there, people driving their car on Ring Road and coming back and looking at the lake. In the summertime, it's used for exactly the same things, except one other thing, and that's a transient to go from Deerpath Road to all those people coming down to use the beach down at the bottom part. I have never seen more than 1 or 2 times people having a picnic at the bluff end of that park. And I know that the Park Service has put out portable picnic benches time and time again, and they remain unused. Now, I didn't hear anything about rebuilding the stairway that's going down. I think that's a very important addition that should be used, or should be done, to rebuild that stairway to make it more pleasable, more accessible. Oh, and with regards to the benches, and I have to tell you, maybe I'm a little bit historic in this whole thing, but the benches that they now have, the nice wooden benches with the backs and the sides of metal, are really historic in nature. And I think that more benches should be put along the bluff edge. But to me, stone benches are cold, with no backs, are just a waste of money and time, and I don't think people are really going to use them. Oh, one last thing, and I think I heard it as we were talking. I'm always an advocate to think that the South Beach parking has been underused all these years. I've been down there even when there was regattas down there, and there were empty parking spots. And I think that if there is a special occasion with a lot of boats and boat people are down there, then make it accessible only to them. Put up a special sign that it can't be used. But for most of the time, in the years that I've been using the park and going down there and walking on the beach, that area in the south part has been underused. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank
Yes,
you.
Mrs. Falcone?
I feel like the bag lady. I am having trouble hearing people in the back. Is there something wrong with this microphone? No?
I don't know.
Can you hear me? Yes. Oh, good. I'll shout for you. Good evening, Ms. Chairman and members of the Parks and Recreation Board. My name is Leon Falcone and I live at 930 Lake Road. In the early summer of 2009, we forwarded a letter to the Lake Forest Garden Club asking them to be judicious with this wonderful 110-year-old forest park. In September or October of 2009, Mr. Stimson showed us some drawings to consider. We, as Friends of Forest Park, then went out into the park marketplace with an open form that was provided at the Parks and Recs meeting and gathered 100 signatures of those in disagreement and delivered them to the chairman. Can I give you one of these? Can you put that up on the front?
We can turn on the document. You talking?
Pardon?
I'm sorry, Leon. What are you requesting?
Can you put it up on there? Oh. And we delivered them to then Chairman Cook and Mayor Cowie in January of 2010. Shortly thereafter, a survey came out on the Parks and Recs Department website. A survey so biased it provided more than a few laughs. But when the first drafts came out showing the removal of the ring road, we rushed back out into the marketplace. This is a feedback form that was from either Mr. Stimson. Can you make it any bigger? And amongst the questions that's asked on it is, park Parking lots, elimination of the Ring Road and East parking lot, creation of 22-car North parking lot, expansion of the South parking lot to 68 cars. And somebody's put a line through this and says, no parking needed. Upgraded beach stairs and access ramp, no. Creation of pedestrian paths and bluff walk, no. Lakeview seating area, no. Ravine and woodland picnic areas, no. Ravine access park and landscape concepts, another. And the answer is on all of it, no, 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 no. And we got 100 of those, and we forward them to the various the chairman and also the mayor to express the fact that we really wouldn't like to see the park changed. We went out into the marketplace after this, and we gathered more than 1,200 signatures to keep that wonderful ring road in Forest Park that overlooks the beach. By standing in front of local businesses in the post office, I personally gathered over 1,000 signatures in just 20 hours. Surprising? Yes. It's very hard to get Lake Foresters to sign petitions, as some people will attest. People overheard the conversation, and when the signer left, asked if they could sign as well. Others went into the Jewel or the Sunsets, etc., and told friends to go out the door and sign the petition. At a rate of 50 an hour, that doesn't leave much room for people to refuse to sign. People knocked on my door all hours of the day, and even called at night to ask when I'd be home that they could come and sign the petition to keep the ring road in. On 11/11/11, Friends of Forest Park wrote a letter addressed to Ralph Gesualdo, Chairman of the Forest Park Board, giving our recommendations for some guiding principles for Forest Park.
1 minute.
I then took the letter out into the marketplace to be signed, and many did. Amongst others, 2/3 of Lake Road signed the letter. The other third being snowbirds or garden clubbers. And even more interesting of all is that of all the people that I asked, only one person said no. I believe that I could go into almost any average street and there would only be a small minority that supports the changes to the park. So I'd like to point out to you, Ralph, that Forest Park Project Board, we're not a vocal minority, as you accuse us of being. We are very definitely the quiet, and I might add polite, majority. The drawings are very nice, and Mr. Stimson may well be an accomplished landscape architect, but the majority of people do not like the idea of a footpath along the edge of the bluff or the removal of the central parking in Forest Park. And we ask you to please consider the obvious feelings of the majority of residents. We love the idea that the Lake Forest Garden Club would be involved with Forest Park. However, we, as friends and supporters of the park, only ask, as we did in the beginning, that it be done judiciously. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from the audience? Yes.
Madam Chairman, my name is Bob Crawford. My wife and I, when he lived at 676 Lake Road, right across from the park, on the corner of Spring and Lake Road. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that I've been involved, and we've been involved, like so many people here, in this process that has been going on for 2.5 years. And I'm amazed, quite frankly, at the tremendous passion and, quite frankly, variety of points of views that are expressed. And I think it's a great tribute to this community that we can come here and we can chat about these things. There's certain things we might agree with or not agree with, but the one thing that is clear to us, and we are 365-day users of the park because it's right out our front door. In fact, I called the police one time. This one guy came around the corner and took a spin in the middle of the park and was generating mud. And I'll tell you, I've seen a few things out the front door. But at any rate, the park is an extraordinary place, and I think we're all trying to figure out certain ways of finding a common denominator here. A couple of things. Number one, the forested area at the south end of the park is a jewel. And I believe, Madam Chairman of the Park Commission, we got about 2.5 acres there. And I would certainly hope the Park Board would take deep interest in preserving all we can do in this. And I know you've cleared it out, and there's certain amounts of buckthorn have been cleared, but this is a incredible jewel. And there are people that just come by on Lake Road and we see them stop and look, and any sort of improvements that you can make. I'm not a horticulturalist or forester, you know, and so I don't have, you know, any comment specific or recommendation, but that is a beauty of this, as well as the adjoining ravine woods and everything, so I underscore that. The second thing is the open vistas that have been, you know, when they're created, and we certainly see them now, are an incredible asset to this community. We've heard, we're in sort of an adjunct to real estate business, and we've heard of realtors saying, it's so great to come down Deerpath or Spring and be able to see the lake. So I would clearly urge that we, you know, make every effort to show this, what I would call tremendous crown jewel of Lake Forest, coming down and seeing that open up in front of us. And I know there's an area of controversy regarding the walkways, and I you know, applaud all the citizens here that are working passionately to try to find their points of view. But my great wife of 47 years almost got hit from behind while walking along the ring road. And I've heard there have been no accidents, but we've known a couple of people who've been near accidents. There's something positive and safety, future safety oriented regarding the possibility of a walkway. And I'm not going to argue whether or not there needs to be one near the bluff or not, but I do believe that it would embrace and would encourage people to use the park further. And lastly, Captain Lovell, you stole my thunder on the South Beach parking lot. I'm telling you, there's nobody down there, and Jim Lovell and I have shared dogs, and we're there, you know, in the park probably, you know, I'm not going to say as much, of course, Christine, you're there a lot, we see all these people. This is the people that are at the park. But that's underutilized, so any creative way you can do it. So overall, I applaud this effort, this process. I know it seems slow and bogged, but I think it's tremendous. Everybody can feel, they can tell their soul and heart how they view this whole project that's undercover. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, in the back.
My name is Michael Ebner. I live at 666 Greenview Place in Lake Forest, and I've lived in Lake Forest for 37 years. I simply want to address one statement that was made this evening, and that is in regard to public-private partnerships in the city of Lake Forest. Reference was made to the 501c3. And I'd simply like to read to you a list of public-private partnerships which go back to 1857 when this community was being organized as the city of Lake Forest. And that would be the investors, the real estate investors who came up to Lake Forest on the train in 1857, paid for a plat out of their own pockets for a prospective city of Lake Forest, and ultimately that became a public entity, this community, when the city was chartered in 1861. I could give you more recent examples. In my lifetime living in Lake Forest, we've had two public-private partnerships for the restoration of the East Side train station. One in the 1980s and one taking place at the current time. Public funds, private funds commingled in order to advance the preservation history of this community. The Market Square Improvement Project of less than a decade ago, a vital necessity for the community that the municipal government could not undertake by itself, and private funds were invested for this very public civic space that's really a hallmark of our community. Gorton Community Center, at its inception, a private-public partnership, and when in distress 2 years ago, once again, a public-private partnership. The new athletic facility at Lake Forest High School is another example of this. Ragdale, Elwa Farm are two other examples of this. So I don't think that people should be daunted by the fact that this is the approach that the Forest Park Project Board has taken. It's a tried and true approach in this city, and it has really benefited this community from its very inception. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from the audience? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My name is Tom Swarthout, 987 Maplewood Road, Lake Forest. I've had the great privilege of living in the community 56 years, not as long as my great friend Fred Jackson, but I just wanted to make a couple comments. I was a former chairman of the Park and Rec Board, and I wanted to kind of relay some information that most of you probably know, but wanted to make it evident to some people who don't. That is, there were many people in this community that were opposed to the acquisition and the relocation of the new rec center. They were opposed to the purchase of Deerpath Park, Northcroft Park, Waveland Park, Town Line Park, LOL Farms Park, and the restoration of those phenomenal buildings. Grove School, as well as the beach restoration. There's always been some people, some very great people, who've been opposed to some improvements. We all believe that Forest Park is a really nice place. We're trying to make it great. This town deserves great. It always has, and I think that should be our expectation. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Go ahead.
My name is Mark Milliman, 455 Hunter Lane, Lake Forest. I am actually the president of the Lake Forest Parks and Recreation Foundation, and here representing them tonight. I want to state that we are, and I am, in full support of the plan that was shown tonight. Obviously, there's some disagreement with some of the elements that are there. I think it's unbelievable, the process that's gone through here and people being able to speak. The fact that you can get 1,200 residents to sign something that says they want a ring road and actually have that ring road remain is why we're all here and talking about this tonight. So there's a process to the entire process that we're doing right now, and it's working. A couple of suggestions. What I'd like to suggest, first of all, is for handicap parking. If we're going to allow parking around the ring road, why not allow for handicap parking full-time around the ring road as parallel? I think that would solve many issues and obviously allow the people that really need this park the most, in my opinion, to be able to see the vistas and all that wonderful stuff that are in the plan. I think that would be a wonderful thing to keep and may solve some of the issues that we have here. Again, I really enjoyed seeing what I saw tonight, and I think there's some really great ideas. You know, if a stone bench doesn't work, I'm sure we can come up with an agreement here on something that will work. But I think the foundations are being laid for a wonderful park, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
I think I saw a hand up in the back. Anybody else? Okay. Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Rick Amos. I live at 1181 Gavin Court. I've lived in Lake Forest for the last 14 years. I would also note that I'm a member of the Friends of Lake Forest Park and Recreation Foundation, for the record. But my comments tonight are really my personal feelings, not necessarily representative of our foundation, which Mark alluded to earlier. I've had the benefit over the last 48 years of living in various communities around this great country that we all live in, and I too applaud the process we're going through here. I think it's healthy. I think we'll ultimately get this project to the right phase at the right time with the right amount of scrutiny. I would add, on a personal level, I'm in that park. I live on the west side of town, but I travel to that park 4 or 5 times a week to either bike, walk, jog, or boat in the summertime. So I'm there quite frequently and think it's a fabulous asset to this community, and my wife and 3 daughters just absolutely love it. Now, that being said, also a businessman that travels quite a bit, and I run everywhere I go. So I spend a lot of time around the country running through a lot of parks. And I would say the time to address and revitalize and clean up and make this a more attractive asset is long overdue. I run parks all over the country, and a lot of them have really highlighted the features of that particular asset in that particular community. And to be honest with you, I'm a little disappointed in the way that park looks today compared to what it could be. I applaud the project. I think the design that we have today is great. Could probably be a little bit better. Everybody's giving comments, and I would echo some of those comments. But I think, you know, to not do anything, to repave the road, is just a missed opportunity. I mean, I know this is a tough economic time, but you know, it's time. It's long overdue to readdress that park and clean it up and make it the asset that it could be in this community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Hi, my name is Craig Bergman. I live at 1065 Acorn Trail in Lake Forest. I've been a resident for a little over 2 years, and I've worked in Lake Forest as a landscape professional for over 30. I am on the Landscape Advisory Committee associated with the proposal that the Garden Club has put together with the city and obviously with the foundation. As a committee member, and I don't know if this is true of all committee members or not, but I feel very good that I can use what I make a living, you know, my expertise I can use for the betterment of the community that I love here. But it's not an opportunity for me to have to defend the fact that I've been asked by an organization of people to use my expertise, not to design the park, not to voice an opinion except my own. And because of the experience that I have, people are wanting to listen to what I have to say. Cliff has done a ton of work for the horticulture and the landscape committee. And I think that there's a group of people that just don't want change, period. And I think we all need to open our hearts and truly, you know, see what our intention is. This is not meant to be an adversarial role that I have to take or Friends of Forest Park have to take. It's about taking this park that by default still exists. You know, the city takes care of it as they know how. There's no maintenance real directive by any naturalistic company really telling the city this is how you have to do it. And whether the boss changes or the worker changes, you still have to do it. I mean, the privately held ravines, the privately held bluffs are in much better control than what our own, you know, famous city parks is the situation of it. Look at all the clear cutting that happened years ago. There was volunteer women planting on their hands and knees, and all of that effort and all of that money and all those plants don't exist today. We have to have a plan to keep this park from falling apart. I mean, it's a lot more than repaving a road. You know, if the design professional has been hired by someone, I applaud the club for hiring them because it's a start. You know, I sit on a lot of things. I go in front of HPC a lot for projects that I do. And it's imperative that the discussion happens, but it's also imperative for the reality of the situation to be said that the city can't handle the park's future itself. It needs help. And all of our community members are trying to do that. And I think that, you know, Mr. Stimson has a huge job, but he has to listen, he has to give options, and he has to be given the latitude to give creative, intelligent thought to it without too many restrictions. So as a committee member, I'm not in charge of designing it. I'm not in charge of picking the bench. I'm only in charge of saying, this looks like it's the right direction. I, as a community member of Lake Forest, I'm going to be a voter. But I'm certainly not swaying the design because I wasn't asked to sway the design. I've been asked to critique
what's being suggested and see if it will be okay for that land and for our community. So for that, you know, we're almost done with our review, but we've had a lot of criticism of our response. We don't really have a response. We had a draft. And, you know, the ring road came back. I didn't want to get rid of the ring road in the first place. I didn't recommend that we get rid of the ring road in the first place. That was me personally. So I just think that these committees, where they really have to be given the ability to voice an opinion and then have enough time before you all decide what's next.
1 minute.
To truly create a fluid continuum between what boards elect to do and what the town needs, and most importantly, what the park needs to be as good or better than it is today, 10 years from now. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Yes.
My name is Judy Bogus, and I live on Wesley Road, 191. And I just want to speak briefly on the handicap situation. I think something that maybe is overlooked. I had a handicapped husband for 25 years. 10 of those years were in a wheelchair. And I will tell you that the most important thing anybody can do with somebody like that is to get them out of your house, get them out of the car, walk, look at that beach. We walked the ring road. It was absolutely wonderful for him. And as far as the handicap spaces, having dealt with it for 25 years, it's not a problem where those spaces are, because if it's crowded, you go down below. You simply find a place that you can do it, and if it's a day that is just awful, we would go to a different park when it was terribly busy. But handicap parking should not be the reason to block any of the vistas. What we're trying to do is open up those lake views. And I think that's an exciting thing, and I think handicapped people deserve to look and see that beautiful lake as best we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Oh, thank you. Hidden in the dark back there. Yeah. Oh, did you bring hot dogs?
Hi, guys. Bob Pasquazi, 172 Washington Road. I'm probably, along with Jim, the oldest people in this town right now. And I've probably lived here longer than most people that are in this room, believe me. And we're getting to a point now where we're bucking heads with each other. I would suggest a referendum and let the people understand what's happening, and then let them decide. But you know, it's very easy to change things, and I'll give one example. Down at Fort Sheridan, if you drive from Highwood to Lake Forest, or Lake Forest back to Highwood, and you see that vista of the lake, do you know how that was saved? I hate to tell you this, but I did. And the reason how this happened was when they were doing Fort Sheridan, if anybody here remembers, they built a berm right on the road. And I went to the Forest Preserve and I told them, if you don't take that berm down, I'm going to get people to come out from Chicago with the newspapers and show them who is losing the sight of that lake. Everybody that drives that road. Well, it's there. I think it's the nicest looking vista that we have on the whole North Shore. And we have one right here, right in Lake Forest. Unusual. But maybe we should just let the people understand what's going on. I'm not for or against it, don't get me wrong. But I think that the people should get a chance to voice their opinion as to whether they want it done or not. I don't know if that's possible, but we had election today. It could have been a referendum. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pasquale. Okay, if that is the end of public comments, we are going to have some concluding comments from Ralph.
I didn't know if you wanted Stephen to address any of those issues now or at the next meeting. Would you?
Do we want him to address? Do you want comments or next meeting?
Next
Would be
meeting,
great.
okay. So let me just say that.
Consensus.
Thank you for letting us come in front of you today. Thank you for the comments we got. And it's always a pleasure to have your name mentioned a few times, and I'm honored at that. But I have to tell you, this is a really exciting process. And one of the things when I was asked to chair this board, and I always have some apprehension, I tend to be too much of a hand raiser, as my wife would say. But I did it because I have a tremendous love for Lake Forest. And I grew up in Lake Forest, my family grew up, my children grew up in Lake Forest, and I have a passion for it. And when I come to a meeting like this and I hear different sides and I hear people that speak passionately, whether they're for the project or against the project, it makes me extremely proud to be part of Lake Forest because of the passion people have for their community. I'd imagine that a debate like this, if it happened to other communities, you wouldn't have that same passion. One of the first things that I did when I became the chairperson is I reached out to the Friends of Forest Park. And I'll say it again at this meeting, I want to thank them for their involvement in this, for their passion about this. You know, we've made some changes in our plan based on Leon's and Basil and the rest of the people from Friends of Forest Park. They were passionate, and they led us down a path that changed some of the direction that we're in. So thank you for that. I really do appreciate the passion that they have and the passion that other people have for this. A lot of the people that spoke today for and against the project are part of our 50-plus members that have been part of this process. Rami did a great job serving on our Historic Preservation Committee, and she added tremendous value, as did Sandy Gunnan and some of the other speakers. So, I'm never offended, and our group's never offended to hear negative comments. Comments are a positive part of the process that we've gone through. It's a positive part of the changes that we've made from the original design. So, and I understand that this is just one meeting in that process. And even though I talk about that we've started aggressive fundraising, we know that we still got some work to do before we reach a final conclusion of this project. And this is just one of those obstacles and one of those learning experiences that we're excited about having the opportunity to do. So thank you for the comments. Thank you for letting us come in front, and we'll continue to work on this process. And hopefully the final plan that we present you will be something that we can enhance a special place and make it a great place, as Tom Swarthout said, who's the head of our engineering committee. We all believe that this is a great piece of property, and we live in a great city. We've got a chance to make Forest Park a very special place, and that's what our committee is challenged to do. So thank you again for letting us come in front of you tonight. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. Okay, I just want to thank everybody. I want to thank Ralph. I'm kind of just ditto right back at you, and thank you for your help. The Forest Park Project Board. I want to thank the Friends of Forest Park again. The dialogue that we've had going back and forth at our meetings. When we started this, I was just a member on the board, and Ralph was the chairman, and now we've, kind of coming to the end of my term, and someone else will replacing me. So it's good to see that the dialogue continues, and that we're all part of the process, and then we all can work together in a polite and professional manner, and that we can come here and we can hear everybody speak on both sides, and we can make changes, and people can say, I might not agree with you, but that's the consensus, and we will go with that. And I think it's important that that's how we move forward with this project. And I thank you all for coming tonight, and I thank you for coming to our future meetings as we continue with this process. And I want to tell you what our next steps are before you leave tonight. Tomorrow night, right back here, Historic Preservation Commission will be having a presentation on the draft of the master plan. So again, you'll have an opportunity to speak to them. Their board works a little differently than ours, but you'll be having an opportunity. Again, no action will be taken tomorrow night either. It's just an opportunity to see the plan. And then following these two meetings, further refinement of the concepts shared this evening and the remaining elements of the plan will be completed. It is anticipated that the Forest Park Master Plan document will be presented in its entirety to the two boards, us as well as Historic Preservation Board, sometime in April or early May. It's possible that it'll be a special meeting, but advanced public notice will be given. Further action anticipated by these bodies includes recommendations on the master plan to City Council, and as appropriate, review and action on specific components of the master plan later this spring. So it'll be a busy spring, and hopefully the weather will stay wonderful and we can enjoy. So thank you very much for coming, and I really appreciate all your comments and taking up your evening to be here with us. So thank you. I do need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. I guess meeting approved.